My projectile has gone completely rogue. I mean, it's out there, it's doing something, probably what I told it to do, but it is not doing what I want it to do. So let's back up for a second. Why is this happening?
I don't know.
This is happening because I'm trying to reduce the amount of steps needed to achieve the core mechanics of my game. If the core mechanics of my game are for the tower to detect an enemy and then apply damage to that enemy, then I don't need the added step of shooting a projectile to achieve that core mechanic. So I'm actually cutting that out and adding it as set dressing after the fact, which is something I haven't seen a lot of other people doing. If other people aren't doing it, maybe it's a bad idea. So let's break it down. If we were in a real world scenario, what are the steps that we would have to take? Archers would have to detect all viable targets, choose which target to shoot at, then they would shoot a projectile at the target, that's their bow and arrow. They would detect if the target was hit, and then observe the damage. So those are our steps that we need to go through. However, for the core mechanics of our game, we don't have to focus on all those things. We can break that down a little bit further. All I need my tower to do is detect all viable targets, sort and select targets by whatever aiming protocol that I've set for them, and apply damage to the selected target. I feel like that's a much shorter process with less room for bugs to crawl into the mechanics, and I want this to be as stable as possible when you're playing the game. But that leaves, what do I do with the arrow after the fact? And I'm actually using a timeline for now with a couple of variables added into it, and it's playing with these variables and trying to get that arc movement to the arrow that really messed everything up. So most of the time when you're using a timeline to move objects and animate them around the world like we are with this arrow, you're going to use a position and a B position thrown into a linear interpolate. And what that's going to do is it's going to move the object from the A location to the B location. But what that's going to do for me is just have the arrow shoot in a straight line. So here's the basic setup of the graph that I have. I've got my timeline, I've got my lerp, I've got my set world location, I've got references for everything hooked up. This works. This is going to bring my arrow from point A to point B, but it's not actually going to look right. If an object is far away, it's going to go the same speed as if an object is close, because over a long distance, it should take 1 or 2 milliseconds for it to get to the target. But when it's on a short second, it should take 1 millisecond or less for it to get at the target. But if it's at that same speed, then it's going to look really goofy. So the first thing I need to do is figure out how can I make the timeline go faster if an object is closer, and how can I make the timeline run slower if the object is further away. Easy day. Set play rate node, run that right before the timeline, and we're able to adjust the play rate. But with that, how do we figure out what the right mathematical equation is to correlate the range with the speed of the arrow? So by taking the distance between my arrow starting location and my target location, mapping that to a value that can be adjusted for desired effect. For me, it was minus 0.1 to 0.6. Subtracting that value, wherever the value came in that range based off of the distance, from the flight speed, and then resetting the flight speed right before I run the set play rate node before the timeline, I'm able to increase or decrease the speed based off the range of my enemy. But there's more that we can do here inside this get distance adjustment function that I've created. What I'm also going to do is off of that distance, I'm going to divide it by 4. And when I divide it by 4, I'm going to set a new variable called arc. And what this variable is going to do for me is it's going to tell me how high does the archer need to shoot the arrow before it comes back down. So if a unit is 800 meters away, we're dividing by 4. I'm going to say you need to shoot the arrow 200 meters up for it to come back down and hit the target. That way we get that loft. And when an object is closer, let's say 100 meters away, they only need to shoot the arrow 25 meters up in the air before they can hit the target. And we're going to use some additional lerps to make this happen. So we know that a lerp moves an object between point A and point B, and it'll go in a straight line at the speed as set by your timeline curve. However, what if we were moving one of those locations as we were going? So what I want to do is take the B location, which is the target location in my initial lerp, to set the world location of my arrow, and I want to move that from that arc point in the Z value down. So it's going to be shooting towards the object the whole time, but I am going to start from 400 meters or whatever value comes in from that divide by 4 arc variable that we set earlier, down to the actual location of the target. What that's going to do is, as the arrow is trying to achieve the B location, and as the B location is moving down, it's going to arc that arrow down into the target. The final real problem here is that the arrow is not facing the target after the initial shot. So the target is constantly moving. As it's moving, we know the arrow is going to follow a little bit. We make sure the arrow goes fast enough to where it's not really perceptible. Would be great if you were doing this in a future mode and this was missiles, because then you could absolutely have the missiles track and follow. We're going to keep the arrows fast enough to not have to worry about that too much. But as it's lofting, the arrows are not, you know, changing direction with the loft, and as there's a little bit of adjustment, the arrows aren't adjusting with that target location, so the arrows are kind of hitting the target sideways, which doesn't look good at all. So we're going to adjust that real quick, and the way we're going to do that is off of the first lerp, which is the arc lerp. We're going to take that value and we're going to get a unit direction vector. So we're going to get the world location of our arrow. We're going to figure out what direction it's moving towards. And then with that unit direction vector, we're going to set the world rotation of the arrow. And what should happen is the arrow will follow the arc that it's moving on.
Do you even know if this will work?
I do not know if this is even going to work, especially when considering for performance. So let me know what you think. Let me know ways that you have solved this issue and different things that I might want to think about. If I am on the right path, let me know of different ways that I can help refine this. Remember, the main platform that I want to build this for is mobile. Once I go to mobile, I can go onto Steam and anywhere else, but I really want to focus on getting it onto a mobile platform, because that's where tower defense games are most fun to play, typically while you take a dump.